South Africa's unemployment rate for the second quarter of the year is now at 23.3%. Now, this is a significant decrease of 6.8 percentage points in the official unemployment rate from 30.1%. Now, Statistics South Africa has just released the quarterly labour force survey data. Also shows that this is the lowest rate recorded since the quarter 3 in 2009. Now, to chat us through this, we do have our editor here, our business editor. So when we try to decipher all of this, Xolani, what exactly does this mean for the average South African?
It paints a glowing picture, but I like what I see when I look at what the Statistician-General has said about how they came to this 23.3%. They said that they had to change their data collection, methods due to the lockdown and people not actually going actively to look for work. And, when it comes to the quarterly labour force survey, it is based on the number of people who actively go out and look for work or who have given up looking for work. So because in the past, between April and June, there was no one who was out looking for work. Data collection was compromised, which is why you're seeing the unemployment rate, being coming from 30.1% to 23.3%. But the important figure that they have announced is that 2.2 million people actually have lost their jobs in that particular second quarter.
So is that the figure that we really ought to be looking at, the number of people who've lost their jobs? Because anything else before that, I guess in one way or another, was to be expected due to the lack of activity during the lockdown period.
It would be interesting for him to explain who they tried to get, because their normal data collection methods were compromised, who they tried to get, who they couldn't get, and how they go about normally not only visiting people who have been trying to look for work, but speaking to employers as well. What is interesting, though, is that the absorption rate, which is the proportion of the working age population that is employed in the second quarter, went from 42.1% to 36.3%. So there was a decrease in the absorption rate itself. And there was also a decrease in the labour force participation rate, which is the proportion of the working age population that is either employed or unemployed. They are not looking for work. They are actually of working age but not looking for work. They have actually decreased because they couldn't get the updated data to actually inform, give a true picture of what the second quarter has been about. So when we look at 23.3%, I don't think anybody would believe that indeed only 23.3% of South Africa's working age population are actually unemployed. We have amongst the highest unemployment rates in the world and one of the worst for prolonged periods over the past 2 decades. And the lockdown has just exacerbated that. It has made things much worse. It doesn't matter where you look, with the economic growth in the second quarter being about 50% on an annualized basis, or it's with the unemployment rate. So when we do, have a chat with him, it is one of the important things to note that the data collection, was actually compromised for the second quarter due to lockdown.
And the reasons why people are not looking for work, I guess that also matters, because there is a section of society that perhaps is discouraged and they're not actively seeking out employment. Could you just expand on this?
So a lot of people, give up looking for work, and that is calculated between 3 years and upwards. They've actively stopped looking for work, and you calculate and that rate as well of people who have given up looking for work, as you also do your data collection when it comes to the people who are actively looking for work but are not finding employment, and those who have actually lost their jobs. As you do your data collection at the SSA, that is what you actually will find. So when it comes to those three, they are quite important, and we expect them to actually increase with many companies and many businesses permanently losing and closing down their operations in the second quarter. So the clearer picture that we will get about what has actually happened since lockdown is expected to come in this particular quarter that we're in, as the Statistics SA is expected to announce those numbers in 2 months' time.
I'm quite interested in this fact, and I'm wondering if maybe you could help shine some light on it. The report says that the unemployment rate, according to the expanded definition of what unemployment is, increased in all of the provinces except the Free State. What are perhaps the unique dynamics within the Free State that would make that province an anomaly in this regard?
It could be agriculture. We saw agriculture in the first quarter in the first quarter and the second quarter of this year. It was the one sector that actually did quite well, and it could be because of the agriculture has done so well in the first 2 quarters. It would translate into people continuing to be employed in that particular sector and in that particular province. But it's something quite interesting to see why there would be a decrease or a stagnation when it comes to the Free State, the expanded unemployment rate in the Free State. But all these numbers are going to actually worsen, just like the labor absorption participation rate and the absorption rate, which have decreased, which is a worsening of, which shows you that people, the economy is not absorbing as many people as it should.
Well, Xolani, the man of the moment is with us now. So let's go to our Statistician-General, Risenga Maluleke, who will be breaking this down further for us. A very good afternoon to you, Mr. Maluleke. If you could just take us through what the numbers say about unemployment and the employment trends in South Africa.
Let us say that the number of those that were employed in the first quarter has declined. That is, it moved from 16.4 million persons to 4.3 million persons, to 14.1 million persons. Now, having declined as such, we have seen a decline of about 2.2 million persons of those that were employed. But also there was a decline on the number of those that were unemployed in the first quarter. But before we come to that, we must talk about this concept of unemployment. A person is considered unemployed if they are actively looking for employment and they don't get employment. And as they are actively looking for employment, should that employment be available, they should be able to take it. Now, in this regard, during the COVID environment and the lockdown restrictions that were put in place, people were not able to actively look for employment. So we have seen a decline on the number of those that were unemployed in the first quarter from 7.1 million persons to 4.3 million persons. Now, those that have declined or left the space of being employed, they didn't get into the space of being unemployed because they couldn't actively look for employment. And as such, the 4.3 million persons that we see, different from the 7.1 million persons that we have seen as unemployed in the first quarter, account for our unemployment rate of 23.3%. Now, having left the space of being employed and not entering the space of being unemployed, and together with those who were unemployed in the first quarter, who actually decreased, these people went to the space of what we call other not economically active. They didn't even enter the space of a discouraged work seeker. And their main reasons when we ask them is that because of COVID-19 and the lockdown, they remained in that space of other not economically active. Because they didn't classify themselves as a discouraged work seeker, because they didn't look for employment until they got tired and got discouraged. Nobody was looking for employment. Everybody was at home. This other not economically active becomes a very interesting phenomenon, because for the first time in the history of our labor force or our labor markets, we see the highest number in the other not economically active. It has actually increased by 5.2 million persons. But this phenomenon is not peculiar only to South Africa. It's all over the world. Only 2 countries, the United States and Canada, that have seen increases in unemployment as well as increases in employment in some sectors. But all countries of the world have seen a decrease in employment as well as a decrease in the number of those that are unemployed, leading to lower unemployment rates. And this phenomenon was actually reported by the International Labour Organization on Friday last week. Now, other than seeing people in that space of not economically active, we also see a larger chunk of people saying they couldn't work because of COVID and the lockdown.
Now, Mr. Maluleke, which sectors would you say contributed most to the unemployment rate?
Almost all sectors declined. That is number one. So we have seen all sectors declining in unemployment. Those that were employed, we have seen larger chunks of people declining. We have seen the larger chunk in your public services and social services. More than 500,000. I mean, the people who do work in the expanded public works environment, the people who are in your social services in the communities, all of them were not working. They were seated at home during the lockdown. Now, we have seen also in private households, we have seen a number of people who actually were not working, and that has actually led to a decline. But also, we wanted to know in the COVID environment, because we included other questions, to say how many people continued working. About 58% of the people in the labor force, 15 to 64, said they continued working. But there are those who worked from home. Your professionals, your managers, everyone, they have the facilities, the smartphones and the tablets, they can connect from home. But your domestic workers in private households, as well as other categories in agriculture, needed to be there in person from the space of the work environment. And we have seen a share of employment, especially in agriculture and trade, being larger than it has been compared to nominal GDP. And this is because in trade, the supermarkets continue to be working while during the lockdown, because they had to make sure members of the public should access essential services. So is the space in agriculture. The farming communities continued producing food.
Mr. Maluleke, this data is quite important because, you've just explained what led to, data collection being done in this way because there was those, individuals who are in that category of other. Let's look at the third quarter. Once you have now those people who may have lost their jobs and were in the category other, in the third quarter, when we actually have to ask them whether they have been looking actively for employment, is there going to be a clearer picture because now we are on lockdown level 1 and the economy is open and people are actively looking for employment?
Firstly, it's indeed, I can't talk about what number of people or the percentages that will come back as the unemployment rate in this third quarter. The job of us as statisticians in official practice is to go and measure, and once we have measured, we will come back. We cannot speculate, but certainly, since being unemployed is a function of being actively able to look for employment and taking up such employment when it's available. Then when people enter the space of actively looking for employment, we will see some movements. I usually say that these are not just definitional issues. The job of official statistics is to measure what happens in our society, the behavior of individuals, as well as the behavior of entities in the form of businesses, does show in the form of numbers. And the fact that people were seated at home and not actively looking for employment is showing now in our unemployment rate of 23.3%. We also see a slight increase in the expanded definition, where it has risen from your regular of about 39% to 42.2%.
And we'll leave it at that for this afternoon. Mr. Maluleke, thank you so much for your time. That's Risenga Maluleke giving us a downbreak of exactly what the unemployment figures are looking like for this particular quarter. Now, when we return, we'll continue with reactions on this data and how it affects you as a South African, Xolani, and